My mother chose Christmas dinner to tell me she had sold my grandmother's house. Not over the phone. Not in private. Not with even a small warning that the last place on earth, where I still felt like a child, had been taken from me. She waited until everyone had a glass in their hand, until the roast was carved, until the candles were glowing on the table, and my brother was filming little clips for his social media, pretending we were the kind of family that actually loved being together. Then she lifted her wineglass and smiled. "Well," she said, in that sweet voice she used when she wanted a knife to look like a spoon, "we finally sold Grandma's house." The table went quiet for only half a second. Then my brother Tyler laughed. My Aunt Linda clapped like someone had announced a promotion. My stepfather, Warren, leaned back in his chair and said, "About time." That old place was nothing but bills. And my mother looked directly at me. She did not look sorry. She looked proud. I felt every sound in the room separate from me. The clink of silverware, the hum of the refrigerator, my little cousin asking for more mashed potatoes, the soft Christmas song playing from the speaker in the living room. Grandma's house. The blue house on Maple Creek Road. The one with the porch swing. The one with the cracked bird bath in the front yard. The one where my grandmother taught me how to make cinnamon rolls and how to keep quiet when adults were being cruel, until the right moment came to speak. The house my mother had promised me she would never sell. I had spent years asking about it. Years begging them not to rush. Years offering to help with taxes, repairs, insurance, anything. But every time I brought it up, my mother brushed me off. "Don't be dramatic, Claire. It's just a house. You always make everything about feelings." It was never just a house. It was the last place Grandma had held my hand. It was the place she had pulled me into the pantry one Thanksgiving, when I was 17 and crying, because my mother had called me selfish in front of everyone, and whispered, "One day, you will learn that people can be related to you and still not be your home." That sentence had saved me more than once. Now my mother was smiling across a Christmas table, waiting for me to break. My brother Tyler raised his glass to finally getting rid of the haunted museum. A few people laughed. I did not. I looked at my mother. Her red lipstick was perfect. Her pearl earrings caught the candlelight. Her smile had that sharp little curve it always had when she thought she had won. "How much did you get for it?" I asked. My voice came out calm. That surprised everyone more than tears would have. Warren chuckled. "Nuff," Tyler said. "More than you could have afforded, that's for sure." My mother gave him a look, but not the kind that meant stop. The kind that meant not yet. I took my wineglass by the stem. I lifted it slowly. I let the red wine touch my lips, and I took one small sip. Then I set the glass down. "That's interesting," I said, "because I bought it yesterday." No one moved. For one clean second, the room became so silent that I could hear the candle flame flicker. My mother's smile froze. Tyler blinked. "What?" I looked at him, then back at my mother. "Grandma's house," I said. "The blue house on Maple Creek Road. I bought it yesterday afternoon. The deed is already recorded." My Aunt Linda lowered her fork. Warren's face turned the color of uncooked dough. My mother laughed once. It was not a real laugh. It was a sound people make when reality knocks and they try to pretend it is just the wind. "Claire," she said, "don't be ridiculous." "I'm not. That house was sold to an investment buyer." "It was," I said, "through an LLC. Mine." The word mine landed harder than any shout could have. Tyler pushed back from the table. "You set us up." I smiled, not wide, not cruel, just enough. "No, Tyler. You sold Grandma's house without telling me. You set yourselves up. I only made an offer." My mother gripped her napkin so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You had no right." That almost made me laugh. "No right to buy a house you chose to sell. You knew what that house meant to this family." "No," I said softly. "I knew what it meant to Grandma. And I knew what it meant to me. The rest of you called it a burden." The room changed after that. Christmas dinner stopped being dinner. It became a courtroom with candles, gravy, and a dead woman's memory sitting at the head of the table. And I had not even shown them the first receipt. To understand why I bought that house in secret, you have to understand what my family did after Grandma died. Her name was Evelyn Harper. She was not rich. She was not famous. She never wore expensive jewelry or drove a new car. But she owned that little blue house outright, and to me, that made her the wealthiest person I knew. She had peace. She had a garden full of tomatoes every summer. She had a kitchen drawer stuffed with handwritten recipes. She had quilts folded in the hallway closet that smelled like lavender and cedar. She had photographs in mismatched frames, and a little brass bell by the back door that she rang when supper was ready. When I was a child, Grandma's house was where I went when my parents were fighting. When I was a teenager, it was where I went when my mother told me I was too sensitive. when I was in college. It was where I went when I could not afford to come home for every holiday, because Grandma always said, home is not a place that charges admission. My mother, Denise, never liked that Grandma and I were close. She liked being admired. Grandma liked being honest. Those two things rarely sat comfortably in the same room. Grandma saw things. She saw how Tyler could break a rule and get a laugh, while I could breathe wrong and get a lecture. She saw how my mother borrowed money and called it family support, then acted wounded if anyone asked when it would be paid back. She saw Warren slip into our lives with a salesman's smile and a habit of measuring every person by what they could give him. Grandma never caused a scene. She just noticed. And when she got sick, I was the one who drove her to appointments. Not my mother, not Tyler, me. I took time off work. I sat in hospital chairs. I learned the names of pills I wish I had never heard of. I watched her hands get thinner. I listened when she talked about the past. One rainy night, about 3 months before she died, Grandma asked me to take her home from the hospital by the long way. I want to see the old church, she said. So I drove slowly through town, windshield wipers ticking back and forth, while she looked out the window like she was memorizing every porch light. When we reached Maple Creek Road, she put her hand over mine. Claire, she said, promise me something. I looked at her. Anything. Don't let them turn my life into a check. I did not understand then. Not completely. She closed her eyes for a moment. Your mother thinks selling the house will fix everything. It won't. Money does not fix a hole when the hole is greed. It just makes it deeper. Grandma, did you put the house in the will? She opened her eyes and gave me a tired smile. I did what I could. But people hear what they want when money is in the room. That was all she said. After she died, my mother took control with frightening speed. She said she was the executor. She said the will was simple. She said Grandma had wanted everything divided fairly, which in my family meant my mother decided what fair looked like and everyone else was expected to nod. I asked to see the will. My mother acted offended. You don't trust me. I said, I trust paperwork. That was the first time she called me cold. The second time was when I asked about Grandma's personal things. By the time I got to the house, most of the rooms had already been stripped. The quilts were gone. The recipe drawer was empty. The old photographs had been packed into plastic bins and shoved into the garage. Tyler had taken Grandma's record player. Aunt Linda had taken the china cabinet. Warren had called a junk hauler for the furniture he said was too old to be worth the trouble. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty drawer where the cinnamon roll recipe used to be, and felt something inside me go very still. My mother walked in carrying a box of glass ornaments. Don't look at me like that, she said. You had your chance to take things. No one told me you were clearing the house. We can't plan everything around your feelings. That sentence became the family motto. Every time I asked about the house, they used it. When I offered to buy it, my mother said, don't be silly, you couldn't handle the repairs. When I offered to cover the property taxes for a year, Warren said, that's not how real estate works, sweetheart. When I asked if we could at least wait until after the holidays, Tyler said, it's a house, not a shrine. But I noticed something. They did not list it right away. For months, they complained about expenses. They complained about the roof. They complained about insurance. They complained about the neighborhood, even though it was the same quiet street where children rode bikes under maple trees. Then one afternoon in November, I drove by and saw a small white sign in the yard. Not a regular for sale sign, a sign that said private property, no trespassing. That was when I knew they were hiding something. I did not confront them. Grandma had taught me better than that. She used to say, never warn a snake that you saw it move. So I started looking. The first thing I did was search the county property records. I work in compliance for a medical supply company, which sounds boring until you need someone who knows how to follow a paper trail. Paper tells the truth, people try to dress up. The county website showed Grandma's house was still in the estate's name, but there was a pending transfer notice attached. No buyer listed yet. No sale price, just a file number and the name of a title company I did not recognize. I wrote it down. Then I called the probate court. I did not pretend to be anyone else. I gave my name. I gave Grandma's name. I asked if the will was public record. The clerk said yes. My mother had let me believe the will was some private family document locked away in her desk. It was not. 2 days later, I stood in the courthouse with a paper copy of my grandmother's will in my hands. And that was the first crack in my mother's story. Grandma had not simply left everything to my mother. She had left my mother the role of executor, yes. She had left personal property to be divided. But there was a paragraph about the house that made my breath catch. It said my mother could sell the property only if all direct heirs were notified in writing at least 30 days before listing or accepting an offer. All direct heirs included me. I had never received a letter, not an email, not a text, nothing. The second crack came from the title company. I called and asked general questions. They would not tell me much, of course, but people reveal a lot when they think they are being careful. The woman on the phone said, the seller requested an expedited close before the end of the year. The seller. My mother. Before the end of the year. Why the rush? I found the answer in the estate accounting file. My mother had been using estate funds to pay for things that had nothing to do with Grandma's house, a new patio at her own home, credit card reimbursements with vague notes like family expenses, a loan to Tyler for his truck repair, payments to Warren for property management. Even though the house had sat empty except for dust and memories. It was not millions of dollars. It did not need to be. Betrayal does not have to be large to be complete. I sat in my car outside the courthouse, the file on my lap, and cried for exactly 3 minutes. Then I wiped my face. Then I called a lawyer. Her name was Marisol Grant, and she had the calm voice of a person who had seen families set themselves on fire over smaller things. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, do you want to stop the sale or buy the property? I had expected sympathy. I'd expected outrage. I had not expected a choice. Can I do either? I asked. Possibly. If your grandmother's will requires notice and you did not receive notice, there may be a challenge. But challenges take time, and if the buyer is legitimate, things get complicated. What if the buyer walked away? Do you know the buyer? No. Then don't count on it. I looked through the windshield at the courthouse steps. A family walked out together, laughing about something, all of them linked by the easy kind of trust I had stopped expecting from mine. I don't want strangers flipping that house, I said. I don't want the porch torn off. I don't want the garden paved. I don't want Grandma's life turned into gray vinyl and rental income. Marisol was quiet for a moment. Then she said, do you have access to funds? I did. That was the part my family never understood about me. Because I did not brag, they assumed I had nothing. Because I drove a 6-year-old car, they assumed I was struggling. Because I rented a small apartment instead of buying something flashy, they assumed I was behind them. But while Tyler was financing trucks and my mother was redecorating kitchens, I had been saving. Quietly, aggressively. I had stock from my company. I had a bonus I never mentioned. I had the life insurance money from my father, my real father, who died when I was 9 and left me a small policy my mother had always pretended was not worth discussing. It had grown. So had I. Marisol connected me with a real estate attorney who specialized in estate sales. He found the listing before it ever hit public websites. It had been offered privately to a local investor group at a price below market, because my mother wanted a fast sale and no questions. The investor group did not care about Grandma. They cared about the lot size. They planned to tear the house down and build 2 narrow townhomes. When I heard that, I stopped feeling sad. Sadness became fuel. My attorney formed an LLC so my name would not appear in the offer. I made a stronger offer than the investor group. Clean, fast, no inspection delay, proof of funds. The investor group hesitated. My mother pushed for the highest offer, because of course she did. And that was how the same greed that made her hide the sale handed me the house. The closing happened on December 23. I signed the papers in a conference room that smelled like tunner and peppermint candy. The title agent smiled politely. My attorney slid documents toward me one by one. My hand shook only once when I saw the address printed in black ink, 1247 Maple Creek Road, Grandma's house. When it was done, I drove there instead of going home. Snow had started falling in thin, soft lines. The porch looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was peeling. One shutter hung crooked. The garden was sleeping under frost, but the house was still standing. I unlocked the door with my new key. Inside, the air smelled stale, but underneath it was still her, cedar, dust. Cinnamon if I let myself imagine it. I walked room to room in the dark, touching doorframes, whispering, I got it, Grandma. I got it back. In the kitchen, I opened the empty recipe drawer. Something scraped at the back. I reached in and found a small envelope taped underneath the drawer lip. The tape was old and yellow. My name was written on the front in Grandma's handwriting. Claire. My knees almost gave out. I sat on the kitchen floor and opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a folded note and one brass key. The note said, if you found this, then you came back when it mattered. Check the cedar chest in the attic. Not everything worth keeping is obvious. Love, Grandma. That was the moment the story stopped being only about buying a house. That was the moment it became war. The attic stairs creaked like they were warning the whole house I was coming. I used my phone flashlight because the pulled chain bulb had burned out. Dust floated in the beam. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath. The cedar chest sat under the little round window at the far end, covered by an old sheet. I remembered that chest. Grandma kept winter blankets in it, or at least that was what she told everyone. The brass key fit. For a second I could not turn it. My fingers were too stiff, my heart was beating too hard. Then the lock clicked. Inside were blankets, yes, but underneath them was a metal file box. And inside that box was the truth my family had buried. There were bank statements, copies of checks, handwritten notes in Grandma's careful script, a list of loans my mother had taken from her over the years. $10,000 for Tyler's first semester after he lost his scholarship, $8,000 for Warren's failed business idea, $5,000 here, $12,000 there, all described to the rest of us as gifts, emergencies, or things Grandma had insisted on doing. But Grandma had kept records. At the bottom of the box was a signed promissory note from my mother. It said she owed Grandma $68,000. It also said that if the debt remained unpaid at the time of Grandma's death, the amount was to be deducted from my mother's share of the estate. My mother had never mentioned that. Of course she had not. There was more. A letter addressed to me, sealed in a cream envelope. I opened it carefully. My sweet Claire, if you are reading this, I am gone, and I am sorry I could not make the road easier. I know your mother. I love her because she is my daughter, but love does not make me blind. She has always believed that wanting something badly enough makes it hers. I have tried to protect the house because it protected you when I could not. If the house is sold, do not destroy yourself fighting over walls. Walls can be bought back. Truth is harder, but it lasts longer. In this box is enough truth to stop them from rewriting me. Use it only if you must, and when the time comes, speak calmly. It scares guilty people more than shouting. I love you past the end of the road. Grandma, I read that letter 3 times in the attic with dust on my jeans and tears running down my face. Then I took pictures of every document. Then I called Marisol again. It was late. She answered anyway. I told her what I had found. She said, "Do not show your family anything yet. Send me scans. Bring the originals to my office." And Claire. Yes, do not go to Christmas dinner unless you are ready for them to lie to your face. I looked around the attic, at the chest, at the old rafters, at the little round window where snow was sticking to the glass. They invited me. I said, "Do you want to go?" I thought about my mother smirking, Tyler laughing, Warren calling Grandma's house a burden. Then I thought about Grandma's last line, "Speak calmly." "Yes," I said. "I think I do." Christmas Day arrived, bright and cold. I wore a dark green dress Grandma once told me made my eyes look brave. I curled my hair. I put on small gold earrings. I printed copies of certain documents, not all of them, and placed them in a folder inside my bag. I did not go to my mother's house to fight. I went to give them one chance to tell the truth. Dinner began exactly how I expected. My mother hugged me at the door in the stiff way people hug witnesses. Warren patted my shoulder and said, "Good to see you, kiddo," even though I was 34 years old. Tyler asked if I was still renting, then smirked at his own joke. I smiled. I helped carry dishes. I answered questions about work. I let them perform family around me. All evening I waited. My mother kept glancing at me. She wanted me to ask about the house. She wanted the scene. She wanted my pain out loud so she could call it drama. But I did not give it to her. She lasted until dessert. The pecan pie had just been served when Aunt Linda said, "Denise, did you tell Claire the good news?" My mother put a hand to her chest like she had forgotten. She had not forgotten. "Oh," she said. "I suppose now is as good a time as any." Tyler lifted his phone, pretending to check a message while angling the camera toward me. My mother raised her glass. We finally sold Grandma's house. And there it was. The trap, the cruelty wrapped in holiday ribbon. I looked down at my wine glass, red wine candlelight, a reflection of my own face looking back at me, calmer than I felt. I took a sip. Then I said the line that split Christmas in half. "That's interesting, because I bought it yesterday." Part 5, Receipts at the dinner table. At first, they tried to laugh it off. That is what guilty people do when the truth walks in wearing a nice dress. Tyler snorted. "You bought Grandma's house. With what? Your emergency coupon fund." I looked at his phone. "You may want to stop recording." He lowered it a little, but not enough. My mother stared at me as if she could force me back into the role she preferred. The sensitive daughter. The dramatic one. The girl who cried, and then apologized for making everyone uncomfortable. "Claire?" she said slowly. "Whatever game you are playing, it is not funny." "I agree." Warren leaned forward. "Who told you about the sale?" That was the wrong question. Everyone heard it. Aunt Linda looked from him to my mother. I tilted my head. So you admit you did not tell me. My mother set her glass down hard enough that wine jumped onto the tablecloth. We were going to tell you after closing. After the house was gone. After the details were settled. You mean after I could not do anything? Tyler rolled his eyes. Here we go, Claire and her victim's speech. I opened my bag and took out the folder. The sound of it touching the table was small. The effect was not. I was not notified 30 days before the sale, I said. Grandma's will required that. I have a copy if anyone wants to read it. My mother's face went flat. You went to court records. Les. Behind my back. You hid the sale behind mine. Warren stood. This is family business. We don't need legal threats at Christmas dinner. Sit down, Warren, I said. I had never spoken to him like that before. He actually sat. I pulled out the first page. The will clause. I slid it toward the center of the table. Aunt Linda reached for it. My mother tried to snatch it first, but Linda was faster. Linda read silently. Her mouth tightened. Denis, she said, is this true? My mother did not answer. Tyler grabbed the page from Linda. This doesn't mean anything. Legal stuff always sounds serious. Then you'll enjoy the accounting records, I said. My mother's eyes snapped to mine. There it was. Fear, not sadness, not regret. Fear. I removed the second set of copies. State funds paid for Mom's Pescio, Tyler's truck repair, Warren's property management fees, several credit card reimbursements. None of these were disclosed properly. Warren's chair scraped back. Careful. I am being careful. That is why these are copies. The originals are with my attorney. The whole room seemed to breathe in at once. My mother whispered. You wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Tell the truth. Destroy your family over a house. I looked at her for a long moment. There were so many things I could have said. I could have said she destroyed it first. I could have said Grandma warned me. I could have said family is not a license to steal. Instead I said, no, I am protecting what is left of it from you. Tyler stood up. You're insane. You think buying that dump makes you better than us? No, I said. It makes me the owner, which means the locks are changed, the demolition permit is dead, and no one enters without my permission. Warren looked genuinely sick at the word demolition. Aunt Linda turned toward him. Demolition. You said the buyer wanted to restore it. No one answered. That silence did more damage than my folder ever could. My mother pressed her fingers to her temples. Claire, listen to me. We can fix this. You can transfer the house back to the estate, and we can handle it properly. I laughed once. It surprised me. It surprised them more. You mean I can hand you the house so you can sell it again? You don't understand the pressure I was under. Then explain it. She looked around the table, searching for support. But the room had shifted. People who had laughed 10 minutes earlier were now staring at the documents. My mother swallowed. The estate had expenses. Because you created them. Tyler needed help. Tyler is 37. Warren spent time maintaining the property. Warren billed Grandma's estate for driving by twice a month. Warren pointed at me. You little. Finish that sentence, I said, and I'll add harassment to the letter my attorney is sending tomorrow. He stopped. That was the moment I understood something important. People like my family did not control me because they were powerful. They controlled me because I had been trained to fear their disappointment. Once I stopped wanting their approval, all they had left was noise. My mother began to cry, softly at first, then with a hand over her mouth, the way she did when she wanted witnesses. My own daughter, she said. On Christmas. I felt the old pull, the old guilt, the reflex to comfort her even when she was the one holding the knife. Then I imagined Grandma in the pantry, her warm hand around mine. People can be related to you and still not be your home. I stood. I am not suing tonight, I said. Tonight, I am giving you one chance. You will provide a full accounting of the estate. You will repay what was misused. You will stop telling people Grandma wanted that house gone. And you will never again use her name to cover your greed. My mother lowered her hand. Her tears stopped almost instantly. Or what? There she was, the real her. I picked up my wine glass, not to drink this time, but to move it out of the way. Or tomorrow morning, my attorney files a petition with the probate court. The title company gets notice. The investor group gets notice. Every heir gets copies of the records. And if any money moved where it should not have moved, a judge gets to ask why. Tyler's confidence drained from his face. Claire, he said, softer now. Come on, we can talk? We are talking. This is what talking sounds like when I am not begging. And no one had an answer for that, so I picked up my coat. My mother said, if you walk out that door, do not come back. I paused in the doorway to the dining room. For years, that threat would have worked. It would have made me shrink. It would have made me explain, apologize, bargain, bleed myself empty for one more invitation to a table where I was only welcome if I stayed small. But I had Grandma's house now. I had her letter. I had the truth. So I turned back and said, Mom, I didn't come here to come back. I came here to say goodbye. Part 6: What Justice Looked Like. The petition was filed 2 days after Christmas. My mother did not meet the deadline for the accounting. Of course she did not. She sent me 17 text messages instead, first angry, then wounded, then religious, then practical. Claire, you are making a mistake. Grandma would be ashamed of you. Families should not involve lawyers. Let's meet for coffee and discuss this like adults. Tyler sent his own messages. You think you're special now. Hope that old house bankrupts you. You always hated us. Then, after he realized the estate records could expose the money he had taken, his tone changed. Hey, I said some things. Christmas was heated. Can we reset? I did not reply to any of them. Marisol replied where necessary. That drove them crazy. People who survive on emotional access hate locked doors. In January, the probate court ordered a formal accounting. In February, my mother had to explain why estate funds had paid for improvements to her own house. In March, Warren suddenly remembered that he had not actually performed property management duties worth the amount he had charged. In April, Tyler agreed to repay the estate in installments, though he acted like he was donating to charity. By May, my mother resigned as executor before the court could remove her. A neutral administrator took over. No one went to prison. This was not a movie. The revenge was quieter than that. It looked like signatures. It looked like repayment plans. It looked like my mother sitting in a conference room, pale and furious, while a lawyer explained that family does not cancel fiduciary duty. It looked like relatives calling me, one by one, with voices full of awkward concern, because the version of the story they had been told was falling apart. Aunt Linda apologized first. Not perfectly. People rarely apologize perfectly. She said, I should have asked more questions. I said, yes, you should have. Then she said, your grandmother loved you very much. That one I accepted. As for the house, I did not flip it. I did not sell it. I did not turn it into a museum either. I restored it slowly. I hired a local contractor who remembered Grandma because she used to bring cookies to the fire station. We repaired the porch. We painted the siding the same soft blue, just fresh enough to look awake again. We fixed the roof, replaced the broken pipes, and saved the old kitchen cabinets because they only needed sanding, not a funeral. In the garden, under a mess of dead vines, I found the metal stakes Grandma used for tomatoes. I cried over rusty garden stakes like they were diamonds. One Saturday in June, I opened the kitchen windows and made cinnamon rolls from a recipe I found tucked into one of Grandma's old cookbooks in the attic. Not the original from the drawer. That one was gone. But close enough, the house filled with sugar and butter and memory. For the first time in years, I did not feel like I was chasing home. I was standing inside it. By autumn, I moved in. Not because I could not live anywhere else, because I chose to. I put a new swing on the porch. I kept the cracked bird bath. I framed Grandma's letter and hung it in my office, not where guests could read it, but where I could. Sometimes my mother still sent messages. On Thanksgiving, she wrote, we should not be apart during the holidays. I looked at the message while sitting at Grandma's kitchen table with 2 friends, a neighbor, and Aunt Linda, who had earned her way back slowly by telling the truth when it cost her something. I typed back one sentence. Holidays are for people who know how to honor a home. Then I blocked my mother for the weekend. Christmas came again 1 year after that dinner. Snow fell on Maple Creek Road. The porch lights glowed warm gold. Inside, the table was set with Grandma's mismatched plates, the ones my mother had called junk, because they did not come from a designer store. This time, no one smirked. No one made announcements designed to hurt. No one filmed my face hoping to catch pain. We ate, we laughed. We told stories about Grandma that did not turn her into a saint or a bank account. Just a woman, a strong, stubborn, loving woman who kept receipts because she knew truth sometimes needs help surviving. After dinner, I stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee. The night was quiet. Snow gathered on the railing. Across the yard, the bird bath wore a little white hat. I thought about the Christmas before. My mother's smile. Tyler's laugh. Warren's warning. The folder on the table. For a long time, I believed revenge had to be loud to count. I thought justice meant watching people fall apart. But standing there, in the house they tried to erase, I understood something better. Justice was not that they lost. Justice was that Grandma's house still stood. Justice was my key in the lock. Justice was peace at a table where I no longer had to earn my place by swallowing disrespect. And the best revenge was not ruining their Christmas. It was building a life so honest, so warm, and so fully mine that they could never again convince me I was homeless without them. So if anyone ever tells you it is just a house, listen closely. Sometimes it is a house. sometimes it is a promise. And sometimes, if you are brave enough to come back when it matters, it becomes the place where your story finally stops hurting and starts belonging to you.